Get ready to really deep dive into the Book of Obadiah.
Hmm.
We're going to unpack this short but pertinent prophetic text from the Bible. It's a story of intense emotion, betrayal, and ultimately divine judgment.
And what makes Obadiah so compelling is how it uses a very specific historical situation to really explore these universal themes.
Right. The book centers around the conflict between Edom and Judah,
Uh,
two nations that were actually related, descendants of Jacob. But the relationship was far from harmonious.
to say the least, what struck me most about Obadiah is how it opens. Not with pronouncements of doom, but with this image of Edom's almost delusional arrogance.
That's right. The prophet describes them dwelling in the safety of the rocky cliffs,
Mm.
even soaring high like an eagle. It feels almost like a Greek tragedy,
Yeah,
where hubris leads to a downfall.
exactly. And this isn't just poetic flourish. The rock Obadiah refers to likely points to Selah, a major Edomite city known for its impregnable defenses, carved right into the cliffs. They truly believe themselves untouchable.
So you have this nation, Edom, feeling completely secure, almost invincible because of their geographic location. But then God steps in and delivers a harsh reality check.
And the way that judgment is described is truly chilling. Obadiah uses these incredibly vivid analogies to convey the utter completeness of Edom's destruction.
The ones that really stood out to me were the comparisons to thieves and grape pickers. Could you unpack those a bit?
Of course. In ancient Near Eastern culture, even thieves had a certain code. They wouldn't completely strip a place bare. They would take what they needed, leaving something behind. And grape pickers would always leave some gleanings for the poor to gather. It was a matter of basic human decency, even in the midst of taking.
But for Edom, Obadiah says there will be nothing left. It goes beyond a typical conquest.
It does. The language emphasizes ransacking, hidden treasures being unearthed and plundered. This isn't just about military defeat. It's about utter humiliation, a complete reversal of their perceived invincibility.
That's where it starts to get really interesting for me. Because while this destruction is terrifying, what really stuck with me was why God is so angry with Edom. It's more than just their arrogance. It's this deep, almost unthinkable betrayal.
Yes, that's the crux of it. Obadiah accuses Edom of standing by idly while Judah, their own brother nation, was being attacked and plundered by foreigners.
Now, I could almost understand, sadly, a nation just trying to stay out of conflict. But Obadiah doesn't stop there.
Not at all. He accuses Edom of not only watching Judah's suffering, but actively profiting from it. They participated in dividing up the spoils of war, casting lots for Jerusalem right alongside Judah's enemies.
Wow, that is just chilling. It's one thing to be indifferent to another's pain, but to actually benefit from it, especially when it's family, it just adds this whole other layer of moral bankruptcy.
And to really drive this point home, Obadiah goes on to list in graphic detail the specific ways Edom wronged Judah.
It's a pretty brutal catalog of offenses. Do you want to run through some of them?
Yes, he accuses them of gloating over Judah's calamity, entering their cities when they were most vulnerable, stealing their wealth, blocking escape routes, and even capturing refugees who were trying to flee.
It's like they took pleasure in Judah's pain, almost reveling in their downfall. What's even more striking is how Obadiah weaves this idea of distress right into the language itself.
You're referring to the repeated phrase, the day of their distress. The Hebrew word for distress there, Edom, sounds almost identical to the name Edom. It's like their very identity becomes intertwined with the suffering they inflicted.
Okay, so we've got this picture of Edom, arrogant, treacherous, complicit in the suffering of their own kin. But then the book takes a turn toward this broader concept of divine justice, the day of the Lord. It feels like we're zooming out from this specific conflict to something much larger.
Yes, and this is where Obadiah connects to a larger thread, running through the prophetic books of the Bible. The day of the Lord isn't just about one nation's fate. It's this idea of a cosmic reckoning, a time when God intervenes in history to set things right, to judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous.
So Edom's actions, while horrific in their own right, become this kind of microcosm of how nations so often treat each other, a warning that this pattern of oppression won't go unchecked forever.
Precisely, and that's what makes Obadiah so relevant, even thousands of years later. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about human nature, about our capacity for both cruelty and complicity.
I have to admit, reading this really made me think, if this grand day of the Lord is coming, how do we ensure we're not on the wrong side of that judgment? It feels a little too close to home for comfort.
That's a profound question, and one that I think Obadiah wants us to wrestle with. It's not enough to simply avoid the blatant evils that Edom committed. The text challenges us to look deeper, to examine our own hearts and actions.
You mean like, are we standing idly by while injustice happens around us? Are we in some way benefiting from the suffering of others, even unintentionally?
Exactly. Think about how often we turn a blind eye to things that make us uncomfortable, or how easily we can get caught up in our own lives and forget about the struggles of those around us.
That hits home. It's so easy to distance ourselves from suffering, especially when it's not directly impacting us.
And Obadiah reminds us that's not an excuse. Our silence, our inaction, can be a form of complicity. It allows injustice to thrive. It's like the Edomites who saw what was happening to Judah and chose to look the other way.
But even in the midst of this harsh judgment against Edom, there's also this glimmer of hope. It's fascinating how Obadiah shifts from pronouncements of doom to a message of restoration, particularly for Judah.
Yes, and that shift is crucial to understanding the book's overall message. While God's judgment is a reality, it's not the final word. There's always the possibility of redemption, of turning back to righteousness.
And for Judah, that redemption takes the form of a powerful return from exile. They're not only allowed to come back to their land, they're going to reclaim what was lost.
And more than that, they're going to expand their territory. It's like this complete reversal of fortune. They will possess the land of those who once dispossessed them.
So there's this element of poetic justice woven into the narrative. The oppressed become the victors. The tables are completely turned. But it makes me wonder, is this really about physical land, or is it about something more?
That's a brilliant observation. I think it's about both. The land represents their heritage, their identity, but the restoration goes beyond just physical boundaries. It's about a restoration of wholeness, of dignity, of God's blessing.
It's like they're not only regaining their homeland, but also their sense of purpose, their place in the world.
Precisely. And that restoration is directly tied to God's faithfulness. Obadiah repeatedly emphasizes that this isn't about human strength or cleverness. It's about God's power to bring about justice and fulfill his promises.
So it's not just a story of revenge or conquest. It's about God setting things right, restoring balance.
Yes. And that leads us to one of the most powerful aspects of Obadiah, the way it concludes. It's not with a triumphant image of Judah standing victorious over their enemies, but with a simple yet profound declaration: then the Lord will reign as king.
So it's not ultimately about human victory, but about God's ultimate sovereignty over all things.
Absolutely. The restoration of Judah, the downfall of Edom, all of it points to a larger truth. God is in control. He is the one who determines the rise and fall of nations. He is the one who ultimately brings about justice and righteousness.
That ending really struck me. It shifts our perspective from this very human drama of conflict and revenge to something much grander, this cosmic vision of God's ultimate reign.
It does, and I think that's the key takeaway from Obadiah. Yes, it's a story about specific historical events, about the consequences of arrogance and betrayal, but it also invites us to consider how these themes play out in our own lives on a personal and even global scale.
So it's not just an ancient history lesson, it's a call to action, a challenge to examine our own choices and align ourselves with God's justice.
Precisely, if the day of the Lord is coming, a day of reckoning and restoration, where do we stand? Are we on the side of those who perpetuate injustice, or those who seek to heal and restore?
That's a powerful question to consider. It makes me think about all the subtle ways we might be complicit in wrongdoing, even if we don't realize it. Maybe it's staying silent when we should speak up, or prioritizing our own comfort over the needs of others.
Those are great examples. Obadiah reminds us that inaction can be just as damaging as direct participation in evil. It's like the Edomites who chose to stand aloof while Judah suffered. Their silence was a betrayal in itself.
So what does it look like to be on the right side of history, so to speak? How do we actively align ourselves with God's vision of justice and righteousness?
I think it starts with awareness, with acknowledging the ways that injustice manifests in our own communities and in the world around us. Then it's about taking action, however small it may seem.
So it could be something as simple as speaking up against prejudice, supporting organizations that fight for the marginalized, or even just making an effort to be more understanding and compassionate in our daily interactions.
Exactly. It's about making choices that reflect God's heart for justice and mercy. And remember, Obadiah shows us that even in the midst of destruction and judgment, there's always the possibility of redemption and renewal.
It's like that image of Judah returning from exile, not just surviving, but thriving, reclaiming what was lost, and even expanding their territory. It's a powerful reminder that God can bring good out of even the most difficult situations.
Absolutely. And I think that's ultimately the message of hope that Obadiah leaves us with. No matter how bleak things may seem, God is still in control, working to bring about his purposes. And we have the privilege of participating in that work, of being agents of healing and restoration in a broken world.
Well, this has been a truly thought-provoking deep dive. I know I'm leaving with a lot to ponder.
It's been a pleasure exploring Obadiah with you.
And for you listening, we hope this deep dive into Obadiah has challenged you to think differently about your own role in the fight for justice. As you go about your day, we leave you with this question. What seemingly small actions can you take to make a difference in the lives of those around you? Remember, even the smallest act of kindness or courage can be a powerful force for good in a world that desperately needs it.